White female cop, punching an elderly black man on a busy street. Turns out his son is a police captain. Duh. Have you ever witnessed an injustice so shocking it left you speechless? Imagine walking down the street, minding your own business, when suddenly chaos erupts before your eyes. That's exactly what happened on a sunny afternoon in a bustling downtown area. People rushed to the scene, phones in hand, capturing the unthinkable. An elderly black man, frail but dignified, on the ground, being punched repeatedly by a white female cop in her early 20s. But here's the twist. No one, not even the officer, knew who this man really was. Why was this happening? How did things escalate so quickly? And most importantly, what would happen next? The street was packed. Cars honked, people yelled, and yet, amid all the noise, the sight of this cop striking an old man sent ripples of shock through the crowd. His name was George, a kind-hearted man in his late 70s. He had lived in this neighborhood for decades, respected by everyone. But today, none of that seemed to matter. Was it his skin color? Was it a case of mistaken identity? Or was it something even darker? People stared, unsure of whether to intervene or let the officer continue her assault. But what could they do? Would stepping in make things worse? The cop, young and inexperienced, had completely lost control. Her fists flew, fueled by something that went beyond law enforcement. The question now lingered. Was this police brutality at its worst, or was there more to this story? What could George have done to deserve this kind of treatment? The thought echoed through the minds of onlookers. As the tension in the air thickened, a few brave souls tried to step forward, pleading with the officer to stop, but she only became more agitated. What could make someone act with such violence? Was it fear, anger, or something more sinister? As the crowd grew larger, so did the murmurs of outrage. "Isn't anyone going to help him?" someone shouted. But most were too afraid to act. They knew that interfering with the police could get them into trouble. But as the cop pulled George's arms behind his back and slammed him to the ground, everyone felt the same sinking feeling. This wasn't right. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a man rushed forward. His face was set with determination, his voice booming as he demanded the officer stop. His name was Alex, and the moment he saw what was happening, he felt his heart drop. Why? Because George wasn't just any random elderly man. George was his father. Could you imagine finding your own parent in such a helpless state, being brutalized by someone sworn to protect? The crowd gasped as Alex made his way through. Dressed in plain clothes, no one recognized him at first. But the way he carried himself, the authority in his voice, hinted at something more. He wasn't just another bystander. He was a police captain, and the officer who had been mercilessly beating his father had no idea who she was dealing with. Can you imagine the shock on her face when she realized who he was? How do you think she felt in that moment? Alex's words cut through the chaos like a blade. "Officer, stand down. That's my father." The young cop froze, her fists clenched, her face flushed with anger. She looked up at Alex, confusion and defiance in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" He was resisting. "I had to." "He's 77 years old," Alex barked, his voice trembling with both rage and disbelief. "You had no right to treat him this way." The crowd stood still, hanging on every word. Some were recording, others whispering to one another. Was this young cop really about to face the wrath of a police captain? "Who are you?" she snapped, still trying to assert her authority. But Alex didn't waste any time. "I'm Captain Alex Johnson, and that man you've been beating is my father. You're done here." Can you imagine the weight of those words sinking in? A police captain standing up to one of his own officers. What would happen next? The officer's face turned pale as the realization set in. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The arrogance she had moments ago drained away, replaced by a mix of fear and regret. "Captain, I didn't know." "But you should have," Alex shot back, kneeling down to check on his father. George groaned in pain, his body bruised and aching from the blows. "What did he do that made you think this was okay?" "I thought," she began, but the words got caught in her throat. What could she possibly say to justify her actions? Was it a case of mistaken identity, or was it something much worse? Racial profiling. As Alex helped his father to his feet, the crowd began to murmur louder. Would there be justice? Would this officer face the consequences of her actions, or would the system protect her? "Get back in your car," Alex ordered the officer, his voice cold and firm. She didn't argue. She knew better now, but the damage was done. The scene was recorded from multiple angles, and it wouldn't be long before the video went viral. Could you imagine how fast this story would spread? A white female officer beating an elderly black man on a busy street, only to find out he was the father of a police captain. This was not going to be swept under the rug. As Alex stood there, holding his father, he couldn't help but wonder, how many more times would this happen? How many more innocent black men would suffer at the hands of those who were supposed to protect them? George looked up at his son, pain in his eyes but also pride. "You didn't have to step in, Alex," he said softly. "Yes, I did, Dad. Someone had to." "Would you have stepped in if you were in Alex's shoes?" The question lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of injustice. The officer sat in her car, staring straight ahead, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. She knew she was going to face severe consequences. The captain had already called it in, and soon internal affairs would be knocking on her door. But was that enough? Would losing her badge really be justice for what she did? Or was there something deeper at play? An entire system that needed to be torn down and rebuilt? As the ambulance arrived to check on George, the bystanders began to disperse, but the tension in the air remained. Would this incident lead to real change? Or would it be just another headline in a sea of stories about police brutality? Alex watched as the paramedics loaded his father into the ambulance. His heart ached, not just for George, but for every black man who had ever been mistreated, beaten, or worse, simply because of the color of their skin. How many more fathers, sons, and brothers would suffer before something changed? As the ambulance pulled away, Alex looked back at the officer, now slumped in her seat. Could she ever understand the pain she had caused? Would she ever truly grasp the weight of what she had done? And as he walked away, one final question burned in his mind. How many more times would he have to fight this battle?